Hi, I'm Vincent. I'm an engineer at Photoroom, and in this video, I'm gonna walk you through a really cool new feature that we've just added to the Photoroom API called Virtual Model. So what does Virtual Model do? It's pretty simple. You give it as input an image of a piece of clothing, and as a result, it's gonna give you a realistic photoshoot image where that piece of clothing is worn by an actual model, an actual person. So let me zoom in a bit so that we can see it better. You can see on the left, the input image is just the piece of clothing, and on the right, it's being worn by an actual model. And as we are going to see just after, you have control over the model's likeness, over the environment in which the model is placed, and even on the pose of the model. But first, let's look at a few more examples, because in addition to only passing an image of the clothing, you can also pass an image of the model that you want to use. And as you can see, virtual model will then use the likeness of that person in the result image. So what you're really telling our API is take this item, place it on this person, and create a realistic image of that. Even better, you're not limited to input image that depict a single item of clothing, like here, but you can also pass an image that contains more than one item, like here, where you can see that we have a full outfit on the input image, and that on the output, our virtual model does wear that entire outfit. And of course, passing an input image with more than one item of clothing can also be used with a custom likeness for the model. And last example before we dive into the technical details of the feature, if you pass in an image of a custom model that has a specific characteristic, such as here being pregnant, then that characteristic will also be preserved in the output image. And now let's dive into the technical details of how to use this feature. First thing, here you have a sample code, and if you want to use this sample code to test the feature with your own images, it's super easy. You don't need to run anything on your computer. You just need to click on the Try It Now button. It's gonna open a new web page where you can just upload your own image and you'll be able to see actual results for free. So if you're interested into the feature, I really recommend that you give it a try. And if you want to make your own API code, here are the parameters that you'll need to use. The first one is quite straightforward. It's called virtual model.mode. You just need to set it to the value ai.auto, and that's it. And all this parameter does is to actually enable the virtual model feature. The next one is virtual model.model. So it's the parameter that allows you to choose the model to use, so the likeness of the person that will be wearing the clothing. And here you can use either some of our preset models if you want to get the result fast, or use a custom model. So let's start with the preset models. So for that, you set the parameter virtual model.model.preset.name, and for the value, you use one of our preset models. So you have the full list on the documentation along with images that show you what does these models look like. As you can see, there's quite a choice in terms of diversity. But of course, what's really interesting is that in addition to these preset models, you can also use your custom model. And it's super easy to do so. A custom model is simply an image that depicts the likeness of a person. And to pass that image, you use either the argument virtual model.model.custom.image file if you want to upload an image file, or virtual model.model.custom.image URL if you have a URL pointing to this image. And by default, if you don't specify the parameter virtual model.model, it will have the default value of using the preset model named Avery. Next, we have the parameter virtual model.scene, which allows you to control the environment in which the model is placed. Here is the same logic than for the model. You can use either a preset scene or a custom one. So for the preset scenes, same thing, you have a list, and here you can see what do they look like. There is a good variety that you can use, but if you don't find a preset scene that matches what you want, you can then use a custom scene. Here is the same logic than for the model. A custom scene is simply an image of the environment in which you want the model to be placed, and you provide it using either the argument virtual model.scene.custom.image file or .image URL, depending on whether you want to send an image file or a URL pointing to the image. And just like for the model, there's a default value if you don't provide the parameter virtual model.scene, and it will simply use a random preset scene. One thing to note here that is quite important is that by default, the API will actually remove the background around the virtual model. So if you want to keep the scene, you also need, in addition, to set the two parameters remove background equal false and reference box equal original image. However, the fact that you can also choose to remove the background around the virtual model can be useful, because if you want something more simple than these photorealistic scenes, you could simply have the virtual model over a transparent background, maybe with an AI shadow, but you can also choose to have the virtual model in isolation if that's what you need. And finally, let's move on to the last of the main parameters, which is virtual model.pose. And that parameter lets you control the pose of the model. So this time you can only choose between a list of preset poses, and you can see their full list here in the documentation. And once again, there's a default value. If you don't set an explicit pose, we will just pick one at random among all of the lists of preset poses. So we've seen how to use the main parameters of this feature, but there are still a few things I want to tell you. The first one is that this feature can actually support higher resolutions. When you make the API call, you'll get an output which is of 1024 by 1024, but we can actually deliver outputs which are 2K or even 4K. You have some example on documentation. I really recommend that you have a look at the difference in quality because it's quite strong. Make sure to click on the images to see them full screen, because you really want to see the details to understand what's the difference in quality between 1K and 4K. And if you're interested in using the 2K or 4K resolution, please book a demo with us by clicking on this button on the documentation page. And finally, there are a few additional parameters that you might want to use and that I want to walk you through. The first one is called virtual model.additional product images, and it allows you, as the name suggests, to provide additional images for the product, so for the item of clothing. And this parameter can be quite useful if you have several images showing the product at a different angle. So if you do have additional images of your product, I would really recommend that you pass them using this parameter, because basically, the more images the AI model has, the more it will be able to accurately place your product onto the model. The second additional parameter is called virtual model.prompt, and this parameter allows you to pass a free-form prompt to guide the generation. This parameter can be useful if you notice that for some reason the model doesn't really understand the output that you want. There is some detail that the model just isn't getting from the input image. In that case, you can explicitly give the instruction to the model through that additional parameter. And finally, the last additional parameter is virtual model.size, and that parameter allows you to set the aspect ratio of the generated image. By default, the generated image will have an aspect ratio of a square. However, if you need a different aspect ratio, For example, if you're looking to use the image in an Instagram story where you would need to have a 9:16 aspect ratio, you can get that output through this parameter. Here you would be setting the value portrait HD 16:9, and this way you'll get an output that matches exactly what you need, and you won't have to crop into the image. And that's it. This concludes our walkthrough of the new virtual model feature in the Photoroom API. If this feature got you excited and you want to try it, you have the link to its documentation page in the description. And if you have any question about this feature or the Photoroom API in general, you also have the link to our Discourse community in the description. Thank you for watching.